Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Atsuko Ichikawa, one of the Education USA advisors in Tokyo. I will be a moderator for today. Let me briefly introduce Education USA. Education USA is a US Department of State network of over 400 advising centers in more than 117 countries and territories. The network promotes US higher education to students around the world by offering accurate, comprehensive, and current information about opportunities to study at accredited post-secondary institutions in the United States. In Japan, we have 6 Education USA centers at the US Embassy and Consulates. So today's session is hosted by Education USA Tokyo. So let me briefly go over the schedule for today. Firstly, Heather from Claremont Graduate University will talk about Graduate Admissions 101. Then Emily from Ohio State University will talk about developing a resume CV for graduate admissions. And finally, Nate from Youngstown State University will talk about tips for standing out as a graduate applicant. At the end, we have time for Q&A. So now please join me in welcoming the first presenter, Heather from Claremont Graduate University. And now I'll hand it over to Heather.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with your students. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. Hopefully you can all see this. So as Atsuko mentioned, my name is Heather Reynolds, and I am the Associate Director for International Admissions for Claremont Graduate University. So what I'll be talking with you today is kind of some information on graduate school within the US. So talking about how to prepare for graduate school, finding your fit in a program, how to apply to grad school, and generally what the admissions process is. We'll talk a little bit about financial aid options for you, and then just a few insider tips from an admissions representative for international students. I'll kind of run through this a little bit quickly. So first things first, how to prepare for graduate school. So looking at different, I guess you could say people who have jobs that you aspire to have, or somebody like a mentor or something like that, and looking at their graduate school journey and if they needed a graduate education, that can kind of help inform whether a master's or a PhD or a doctorate program would be good for you. So just generally speaking, the differences between professional schools and graduate schools. So graduate schools tend to be a little bit more focused on research. So for those of you who are looking at PhD programs, or for looking at becoming a faculty member, graduate school is usually a good place to go. And then for students who are looking for some more hard skill sets, or looking to just kind of excel or get a promotion, I guess you could say, in whatever field that they're looking at. Professional schools tend to be really good for you as well as master's programs. And the admissions process for professional schools versus like a graduate program, we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's slightly different depending on what you want to do in the end for your career. So what I think is most important about a graduate school research is finding your fit with a graduate program. So you want to take a look at, for those of you who are looking at graduate schools or research focused programs, getting to know the faculty and what type of research that they're going into will be very important for you, because you are going to be working with them with your dissertation or with your research projects. It's really important for you to do that research beforehand. For professional schools, it's not as important, but you do kind of want to get a sense on what fields that those faculty members have been working in, so that way you can make that decision on which program is best for you. A tip for you when you're looking at specific graduate schools is making sure that you attend campus events or right now online events. So you can get an opportunity to either speak with current students, speak with alumni, speak with admissions representative, just to make sure you get a real well-rounded perspective on the program that you're interested in learning more about. And because everything is online now, it's a little bit more easier, I feel like, to attend those virtual events. One thing you also want to look at with a graduate school program is student support services. So what types of opportunities or what types of support does that particular university offer students? So for example, our specific university, Claremont Graduate School, is graduate only, and our career development office is specifically dedicated towards graduate student success and career planning. So looking at what types of support that your program provides to you can also be a good indicator on whether it's a good fit for you. And then lastly, you kind of want to look at the alumni trajectories for the program you're interested in. Do they have the jobs, your dream job at the end, or oh, I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, so you want to take a look at alumni, and you also want to talk about their experiences within the program as well. So generally speaking, how to apply for grad school. One of my colleagues is going to go into a little bit more detail on how you can stand out as an applicant. But generally speaking, when you're applying to grad school, you want to make sure that you have a timeline for yourself. So like professional schools, or if you're looking at like an MD program or a JD program, so that's like a doctorate in medicine or a Juris Doctorate, those may require some prerequisites. So you want to take a look at what that application requires before you start your application. Do you have time to do those prerequisites, or do you need a little bit more time? So taking a look at that stuff will be really important when you're starting your application for grad school. You also want to provide enough time for letters or your recommenders to write your letters. You also want to save time and give yourself time to write your personal statement and be able to provide that to your recommenders, so that way they have a little bit of sense of what you want to do with the master's or the PhD program. And then lastly, just double check your application materials before you submit your application finally. So just talking about general application materials, this is not an exhaustive list. Each program is going to be different. So I highly encourage you to check in with the admissions representative for the program you're interested in, or check with faculty if you're able to connect with them on what they are looking for in an applicant, because usually for a master's or a PhD program, faculty are usually the ones who are reviewing your application. So getting a sense of what they're looking for will be very helpful for you. So generally application items, it's usually an application form. So just a fill-in form that you need to submit. Usually there's an application fee attached to that. So some schools, I know, for example, our school, CGU, we do offer application fee waivers for students who attend our events. So looking out for those opportunities can really help save you a little bit of money with your application. So look out for those. Some of them also require just like a written statement on why your application fee should be waived. So look out for those for whatever program you're interested in. Official transcripts. So usually they require transcripts from all of your previous institutions. Resume or CV, depending on the program. So usually those professional programs will require a resume. So looking at that work experience. For PhD programs or for programs that are focused on education, usually they require a CV. So that kind of outlines not just work experience, but also some research experience if you have it, publications and things like that. So looking at the differences between those two for the program you're interested in will be important. And our next colleague is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like for you. And then usually for international students, they do require an English proficiency exam score. So usually it's like the TOEFL or the IELTS. Each program is going to have a minimum score. So you'll need to check out for that. And then you'll also need to check to see which types of exams that program will be accepting. Some specific program dependent items. So depending on which program that you're looking into, they'll require usually official test scores. So usually for graduate programs, it's the GRE. But for those of you who are interested in maybe like an MBA program, those usually require a GMAT. So looking at the if a specific program requires official test scores, that will be important for you to look at as well. Letters of recommendation. So for the letters of recommendation, it will all depend on which type of program that you're looking into. So for professional programs, usually like an MBA or even like a master's in IT or computer science, some of those, they encourage you to submit professional letters of recommendation. So coming from supervisors or old bosses or even some volunteer work is acceptable. But for those who are looking into graduate school or research focused programs, they do want to see a specific faculty letter of recommendation as well. And the amount of letters of recommendation can vary between each program. A general rule of thumb, 3 letters of recommendation are usually required for graduate school programs. And if it's a program that is a mixture of a research and professional outcomes, I would say a mixture of those would be sufficient, but check with that admissions representative of that program and take a look at the fine print for the application process. Statement of purpose or personal statement. So each program, again, will be different, but looking at whether they're requiring a statement of purpose or a personal statement will be helpful to you, or do they have a writing prompt, things like that. You'll want to pay attention to when developing your grad school application. Some programs also ask for a creative sample or even a portfolio, depending on the program. That's usually for like art students, or there's auditions as well, or interviews. Usually for music students, a lot of MBA programs do require an interview as well. So looking at those other components and making sure that you have your timeline right, so that way you're able to complete all of these steps before the deadline or by the time that the school is going to be sending out admissions decisions. So I just want to take a minute and talk about like financial aid options, specifically for international students, and kind of the differences in those different terms. Each program is going to be different, and they're going to have different offerings for students. So the first one up here is fellowships and scholarships. So some places are used, it is used interchangeably. I know for CGU specifically, fellowships and scholarships are used interchangeably. But if you get down to the specifics on it, scholarships is usually free money that either an institution is giving you or an organization is giving you. And usually there's an additional application process for those, or if it's built into the admissions process for you, then that's usually what their admissions packet contains, and it will say that. Fellowships sometimes will have some type of work study or some kind of assistantships attached to it. So in addition to studying, you get a fellowship where you will need to complete some teaching assistantships or graduate assistantships that's tied to that admissions packet. So looking at your specific program and speaking with your admissions representative can get some clarity on what the actual university gives out to admitted students. Assistantships, so there's a few different types of assistantships that are usually available for students. There's graduate assistantships. Usually for graduate assistantships, it can range from a lot of different tasks, usually administrative tasks, but it's like a part-time job. They also have teaching assistantships. So teaching assistantships is pretty much where you are aiding a specific faculty member with a class. So you'll be helping with grading, you'll be helping with teaching, things like that. And then there's also research assistantships that could be an option for you as well. So for for research assistantships, usually that's tied to working in your faculty's lab and helping out with their particular research, or maybe helping with faculty helping you with your research that you're interested in learning more about. So those are pretty much part-time working options that are available to you as a graduate student. So taking a look at those options at the particular program you're interested in will be good for you. And then you also want to look at on-campus employment. International students usually are able to work on campus part-time. So it could be in the financial aid office or some administrative work for like the president or something like that. So looking out for those opportunities can kind of help you with funding as well. And then I always suggest looking at your current employer now. So for those of you who are working right now, see if you have some tuition remission benefits that they can provide to you, where your job will help pay for your education because it will help the company or the organization in the end. So looking at those opportunities. And then lastly, looking at personal loans. Usually international students, they look in their home country for specific private loans that are available to them to study abroad. But then there's also some US banks, some private banks that may offer personal loans to international students as well. So usually a combination of these things helps international students and students in general fund their graduate school education. So just want to leave you with a few insider tips on when you're doing your graduate school research. So connecting with current students and alumni. So you want to see their experience with the program. Do they have the career outcomes that you're interested in having? Research faculty. So whether you're looking at a professional school or if you're looking at like a research focused program, checking what the faculty have worked in, what fields that they've worked in, or what jobs have they had before teaching, and also looking at what their research focuses are can help indicate whether it's a good fit for you. Observe classes. Some schools offer the opportunity for students to be able to observe a class before they start their program. I know that CGU, we usually have our spring event where we have some mock classes for prospective students, so you can get a sense on if graduate school is the right fit for you. And then lastly, utilizing your admissions representative. So connecting with them to make sure that you get connected with any resources you're interested in learning more about, getting any specific tips about their application process, or getting connected with current students or alumni. So they are a really good resource for you to be able to get all the information you need to make sure that that program is the right fit for you. So the last thing that I kind of want to share with you all is a little bit about Claremont Graduate University. So as I mentioned before, we are a graduate only institution. So all of our resources are dedicated towards graduate student success and support. Like I mentioned, our career development office, making sure that students are able to plan out their career at the end. Another thing that I just want to highlight specifically about our university is the idea about our transdisciplinary approach to learning. So we find that, it's not just a cookie cutter kind of approach to an issue, but we allow our students within our different programs and our different fields to be able to take from other disciplines to be able to come up with the solution for whatever issue that they're looking at today. So we encourage that kind of cross collaboration between the different programs, and we find that our students have been very successful in doing that. But other than that, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for listening today. I'll check in the chat if students had any questions at the end, and I'll text back if needed, but I will be here at the end for Q&A as well if you think of any other questions that you may have. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Emileigh Beatty, from Ohio State University, to talk with you more about CV and resume building.
Thanks so much, Heather. Good evening, everyone. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint here. So hopefully everyone can see that. Just get started here. As Heather mentioned, my name is Emileigh Beatty, and I'm an admissions counselor for international recruitment at The Ohio State University. And I actually work in the Office of Graduate Professional Studies. So we're assisting students applying to our graduate programs at Ohio State and also professional programs that may be postgraduate or even for undergraduate professional programs. And this evening, I'm going to be talking about developing a resume or CV for graduate admissions. So we'll get started. When you're thinking about a lot of the things that Heather mentioned, you know, with preparing to apply to graduate school, of course, this can be a big piece of it, developing that CV or resume. And it may even be a piece of that application that does take some time to develop if you have not yet created one. But you want to think, of course, about all of the things that are typically included in a CV or resume. And we will talk in a few minutes about maybe some of the differences between CV and resume as well. But first things first, you're thinking about your education experience, the institutions or colleges, universities that you have attended or perhaps you are attending, and including your study and your time there and what degrees may have been earned, experiences like study abroad as well. All of those you want to include. Of course, internships, experiences like this, whether they were directly related to your major or not, all speak to the skills and experience you've earned along the way. Certificates and licensure that you have picked up through your study at a university, of course, or perhaps even through your work or career. You want to include volunteer work as well as something, especially in a CV, that you would want to include if it's noteworthy for the program to which you're applying, or just speaks to you as being a well-rounded candidate with hands-on experience. Of course, relevant work experience. So, you know, you're looking for to apply to an MBA program, you're working in the business field already. Of course, you want to speak to that, and any professional and relevant skills that you feel that you have. Of course, you want to list on something like a resume or CV. Awards and scholarships. And these are not always directly academic related. And this kind of goes into the next one. Perhaps there's something even through your work or job that you've received, but you certainly want to note those. And then, of course, career achievements. Maybe you started as a counselor and you've become a senior counselor, or you've worked your way up to a director or something in your role at your work. Of course, you want to include that as well. And another thing to think about, and I think maybe we all will speak to this for a moment from the different point of views of our presentation, but think about your audience and who will be reading your resume or CV. When you're applying to graduate school, there are a lot of different areas that could potentially be reviewing your documents. It may be admissions officers and advisors that are initially doing a review of your application, taking those documents, and they may play some part in making the decision of admission. Of course, faculty and instructors, most times at the graduate level, it is the faculty, instructors, and even researchers in your field, in the program to which you're applying, that are making the decision. So is this something that they can clearly read and understand the text that you're using? Is this something they're using within their program? Perhaps you do a certain kind of research in your field in physics or biology. You want to use those terminology that those in your field would be familiar with. And then program coordinators or directors. Perhaps you're applying to a program that doesn't have someone that's a researcher directly involved, but they're a coordinator and they're gathering those documents for a faculty chair member or something like that. Also, there may be a graduate school or office that would be reading this documentation as well. An example I can give is once an application is complete at our institution, then, and I think many colleges and universities in the US are similar in this. Once the application is complete, it's usually read and reviewed by the program at the graduate level, the program that you're applying to, and then it may then get funneled through graduate school or office that they know the program wants to admit you, they do the final sign off, or especially for the funding that Heather spoke to, associateships, assistantships, or a type of fellowship that you might receive or be considered for. It's typically a graduate school or office, this type of area that is approving that. So is your resume or CV, is it clear? Is it concise? Is it able to be read by all of those that might be involved in being the audience of your document? And then just some things I wanted to note with education and experience. You really want to ask yourself, how does your education and experience, how does that tie in to your application and this program, to the field that you're applying to, that you want to be considered for? How does your career path, how does all of this come together? And you want to write and construct your document from that point of view, thinking about that as well. Be sure to include skills which display a very strong fit for that program. And we'll talk a minute about maybe some others that don't seem directly related, but of course you want to include, if you're applying to a program that's technology based and you have experience with all these different types of softwares or things like that, you really want to hone in and speak to those and noting those on your resume or CV. And then you want to exhibit experience which shows not just how the program is going to help you in your study, but how will you be able to contribute to that program as well? Perhaps you've done research or you've published a paper or work, you've developed a type of portfolio that you see could be really beneficial to the program to which you're applying, and maybe even build on the work that they're doing. So of course, visiting that specific program's website, getting familiar with the faculty involved, things like this, it can all help you in constructing that CV or resume. And then of course, standing apart, you want to include maybe even some unique extracurriculars that showcase some of your talents and abilities. One example I might give, you might be in a heavily research-based field. You might be applying to chemistry, master's in chemistry program, but perhaps you play an instrument or something like this, which really helps you hone in on some very critical skills, and you're reading music, things like this, that kind of these skills all work together to help you achieve your goals. So if you have talents and abilities that are using critical and analytical skills especially, that might be an interesting piece to include on your CV or resume. And then any accomplishments that speak to your being a well-rounded candidate as well. Have you won an award? Were you in a race or a marathon or something like this? But these can speak to, your endurance, to the work that you've done and where you've put your efforts and goals. So think about things like that as well that can help you stand apart. And then to talk about the qualities of a strong resume or CV, some important things to note. you want your resume or CV to, of course, be concise and well organized. And just to talk briefly about a moment about CV or resume, it's very important that the program you're applying to, you think about or you look at their specific admission criteria. Reason being, US institutions, colleges, universities, they will use resume or CV. Sometimes they'll use it interchangeably. So they will say, oh yeah, we want a resume, we want a CV, and they're just thinking a document that has your education experience, it has your work experience, your publications, things like this. Some programs are very specific and hone in on the differences between the two, and they will either ask for a resume, and they mean, and they will usually state this so it's very clear for you, but they will state, it's something, a resume is something that is shorter, it's usually 1 page, and it will speak to your education in very directly related experience, where another program may ask for a CV, and they'll usually be very specific too if they're honing in on this difference. That's usually longer. It can be 2, sometimes 3 pages, but usually about 2 pages, and it will typically be a little more exhaustive. So it doesn't just have education and certificate, but it may have all the research that you've done and things like this, everywhere you've studied, accomplishments, the extracurricular activities that we mentioned previously. So you want to be sure, the key with that is to know whether it's a resume or CV, or if they don't mind either, they use it interchangeably. Be sure, and it's always good practice, to always look at the admissions criteria of that specific program. And if you have questions and you're not certain what's being asked, it's always good to reach out to the program, make that connection with them, ask those questions, work with the admissions office. You can ask them, but make sure you have a clear understanding of what they're asking for. And with a resume or CV, of course, you want that to be organized, like we mentioned, concise, and be sure to proofread. It's so important. If you have a friend or family member, someone that would look over it for you as well, it's very important to have all of that, because it speaks to you as a candidate of that program, your attention to detail, things like that. Of course, you want it to be clearly read. If it's a resume, something like that, that's just a page, or maybe it's 2 pages, you want to make sure that it's giving a clear, quick snapshot of your education, your experience, talents, and abilities. In a moment, we'll look at some examples of this if you're not already familiar, but of course, there's usually some bolded headlines. First experience, your name and then experience. It would then usually go to work experience, things like that, but you clearly outline it so that if they want to refer back to where you're currently working, or what extracurricular activities have you been involved in, they can easily find that on the page. Something to also note about a CV or resume when applying to graduate school is make sure that this works with your statement of purpose. When you're creating a statement of purpose, you want those two are kind of that and your CV or resume, they're complementary documents. So you don't want them to be identical. You don't want your statement of purpose to just be your resume in a paragraph form. And you don't want your resume or CV to just be your statement of purpose and bullet points. But this is an opportunity to really take time and shape and outline your experiences on your CV or resume, and then your statement of purpose can then go, if your resume or CV is constructed properly, then your statement of purpose can really go hone in on specific experiences, and they'll work together to give them that picture of you as a student. All the pieces of the application work together for that. And then, of course, like I mentioned before, you want to make sure it meets the set admission criteria for that college, for that specific program. And it's always a good idea if you've read their specific criteria before starting, then once your document is done, go back and make sure what you've written on your resume or your CV, this is matching what the program is looking for. So these are just some tips, some ideas for developing quality in a strong resume or CV. And now we'll just take a moment to look at an example. So we have Jane Doe here. This is an example of a resume. You'll see they emphasize the name as the heading, very clear, so it all ties together with you as the candidate. And then it's going through education, the education experience, the bullet points, kind of organizing everything, and it uses that reverse chronological order. So you want to put what you're doing most recently at the top. And then like we talked about a moment ago, you're using those clear headings. So and yours may be a little bit different from another person's as far as what your heading will be, depending on the field that you're in, depending on your experiences. So make it fit your story and your experience, but ultimately you want to make that very clear and concise. And if you go online, you know, a lot of us will look online, Google things. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands, tons of examples for you as well. So be sure to go out there and look if you need a template. Also Microsoft Word, there's softwares usually that have a template that can help you develop a resume or CV as well. And then for the next, and then here, sorry if I need to, sorry, I'll go back. So here is the example of the CV. You can see looks very similar. It's just a little bit longer. It still uses that reverse chronological order, still has the heading of your name at the top. And it starts with education before it goes into the relevant work experience. But then you can see it's also including publications, honors and awards, your leadership activities, things like this that can work to really boost your application and your other application documents to really speak to your strengths. Also, I didn't directly mention, but if you speak multiple languages, things like that are important to include. If you have experience with other types of like computer softwares or computer programs, things like this can all be beneficial to include on a CV as well, depending on, again, what program you're applying to and your goals ultimately. So that's just a short overview I wanted to share with you about developing a resume or CV. Thank you for your attention. I've included my name and then my email contact. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer about developing a resume or CV or applying to graduate school. Or if you had questions about our campus, that's the picture of our campus there. And then I've also included the GP Admissions website. If you go there and take a look, you can do a search for any of our 200 plus graduate programs, and it'll go into more in depth about those programs and their application criteria. So with that, thank you so much. And I'll introduce our next speaker is Dr. Myers from Youngstown State University, going to talk to you and with more helpful information about applying to graduate school.
Thanks, Emily. It says I can't start my video because, yeah, there you go. Okay. Thank you for joining me and us this evening. As Emily mentioned, my name is Dr. Nate Myers. My students call me Dr. Nate. I'm Associate Provost of International Initiatives at Youngstown State University. I'm also an Associate Professor in a College of Education where I have a professor position there. So officially, my presentation is about tips for standing out as a graduate applicant. Every piece of advice you've heard so far is spot on, and I'm going to just fill in the gaps where I can. Now, as far as application and timing goes, I think the first question, working with multiple Japanese students over many years, I think the first question you have to answer is, what kind of applicant are you? Are you going to be a regular admit, or are you going to be a conditional admit? If I were standing in front of you at a live presentation, I would say, how many people are concerned about preparing your English? And some of you may raise your hand, some of you may not. But those of you who raise your hand and say, yeah, I am kind of concerned about my TOEFL score, my IELTS score, what does that look like? So I think that this is the point at which you want to engage. If you have strong English and for instance, let's say the university you're looking at, let's say it's requiring a 7.0 IELTS score for graduate admission. That's very typical. Then I think that you definitely want to look at this road of regular admit, right? Because and your English is already strong. And so you already meet, maybe you're close to that requirement. Now, let's say the graduate program you're looking at is requiring a 7.0 IELTS. And right now, you know that if you take the test, you're only at a 5.0 IELTS. Okay, that's a big gap to make up. And it's very difficult to make up a span of 2.0 in the IELTS test within even a year while you're studying overseas in a non-English speaking environment. So in that case, I would recommend a conditional admit, which means that you can actually come to start graduate school at many universities without an IELTS or TOEFL score that's already prepared. You can start an ESL program, and the way that works is that once you finish the ESL program, you can simply continue on into your graduate program. So not every university has this option, but I think it's worth asking the question depending on where you are with your English proficiency right now. The second question I would ask is about deadlines, of course. Universities usually have two different kinds of deadlines. There's application deadline, and then there's a scholarship deadline. And those can be the same or they can be different. At YSU, at my university, it is different. They are different days. When to apply? Does it matter? Yes, it absolutely matters when you apply, especially at the graduate level for master's and PhD programs. Why? Is because, number one, often in some programs the spaces are limited, but probably it's more true that the scholarship funds will run out. And this is absolutely the truth. And so the way that I describe it to students is that, we start with a bag of money and to distribute in terms of scholarship. And we start to spend that money right around November, December for the students who will come the next August. And so as you imagine, with a bag of money in November, there's quite a bit of money left. December, we've spent some. We go on into January and February. And by the time we get to April, there's almost nothing left in that bag. And so what you want to do, you want to apply early before, the institution starts spending that money to make sure that there's a lot of resources left. The thing that I've noticed is that when admissions committees usually meet in November, they're not looking, let's say, they're looking more carefully when they meet in April, much more carefully when they meet in April, because they only have a little bit left. When they meet in November, I think they're more open-minded and more willing to make different kinds of determinations about scholarship. So I think it works to your advantage to apply earlier. So, again, what should I do? Apply early. Those admissions committees will start their meetings usually about December, and they'll try to wrap them up before April at my institution, and to finalize those scholarship decisions for graduate study. And I saw a question on the chat: how many universities should we apply to? Well, I think that you're likely to get very similar advice through the Fulbright, through EducationUSA, but you want to apply to more than one typically. And I would say usually apply to 3. You want your top university, your top choice, you know, the one that you really, really want to get into and you hope you can get a nice scholarship from. You want a middle level university that, you know, you'll be happy with, and you want a 3rd university probably that you know that you likely will get into and can maximize the scholarship potential there. So I would apply early and I would apply to 3. Obviously, you want to make sure your file is complete. You want to pay attention to those document requirements. The universities, I guess maybe some still require original documents. We require scans. That's very typical now in terms of what the practice is. You scan your originals and then you show up with a physical copy on the first day. An important thing is scans are acceptable, and you wouldn't believe how many times we have to you know, deal with this particular problem. But what are the resolution requirements? And how and when should you produce your originals? Again, do you have to mail those in? Can you show up on the first day with them? You don't want to use your iPhone 5 to take a picture of the document with your cat sitting in the background. It's not a good look for anyone, especially at graduate school. So, you know, just make sure you know what those requirements are. And also make sure your official scores are delivered by the deadline to the universities you select. If you are applying as a regular admit with a TOEFL, an IELTS, a GRE, then you know you can select on when you sit to take the test what universities you want those reported to. And so it's always a good idea, if you haven't taken that test yet, to have in your mind the universities that you're going to be applying to, so you can just list them. And then you get, I think, three free score reports when you take those tests. Let me say a little bit about the GRE. There's a common, I think it's a misconception, that every graduate program in the United States will require a GRE. Some will, and some will not. Now, I think the GRE directly relates to English proficiency. So my advice is, having worked in ESL and in international admissions, right now, if you're sitting there and you know you can score a 7.5 IELTS or higher right now, then it might be worth your time to try to improve your English to the point you can take this GRE. If you're sitting there right now and you say, you know what, I know that my IELTS score will be below a 7.5, I don't recommend looking at programs that require a GRE. Why? Is because the GRE is an extremely complex test for native speakers of English. And it is highly unlikely that a student with a 6.0 IELTS, I mean, it's like going before a firing squad. I mean, you're not going to do well on the GRE if you have that lower level of English proficiency. The good news is that there are multiple programs all over America that will admit you without a GRE in different kinds of fields. And so I think that's one thing you have to pay attention to. And then finally, you want to stand out in the right way by making sure all of your documents are in order and on time and presented in the way that the university requests. Just a few more slides, and then I'm going to open it for questions. So writing a graduate essay. It is common for every program, I believe, at our university. We have more than 25 graduate programs, and all of those require a graduate essay. So you need to identify, as others have mentioned, who your audience is. Who is going to read that essay? At our university, it will be an academic department chair, and it will be a scholarship awarding committee. And knowing that, so that tells you, and the committee is composed of professors at the graduate level. And so knowing that the committee is composed of professors, you might be able to guess what professors are interested in. And they're probably mostly interested in your academic background. They're probably most interested in what you hope to do at their university. And 3, who you want to work with. But I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. So what should I write? The standard advice for every essay is how my past experiences has turned me into who I currently am, and how this university will help me take the next step into the future. How do I want to use, or how do I want to partner with the graduate school at Claremont or Ohio State or Youngstown State to help me to be a better professional, to help me to be a better researcher, to help me take the next step in my professional career. So professors look at admitting graduate students like we're buying stocks. We want to buy low, and we want to buy a stock that will grow. And in this case, you are the investment that we're making. And we want to see someone who has high potential, has high goals, and knows a little bit about who we are. Final thoughts about standing out. Again, for master's and PhD programs, a committee of professors, they're usually going to determine whether we will be admitted at the graduate level and how much scholarship, if any, that they're going to offer you. Now, I think it's, and I say in some circumstances, I'm going to say in 95% of the circumstances, it is a very good idea to contact a professor or two in the department that you wish to study with. At the bachelor's level, this doesn't matter. At the graduate level, this absolutely can make a difference to put you over the top as an applicant, as someone who wants to maximize their scholarship potential. And what do you say in an email? You don't just write an email and say, hey, this is me. I want to study with you. You want to do research about who they are, who the university is, who the professors are, and what their active research lines are. And you want to explain clearly about how you know them. Maybe they're a well-known professor, maybe they're famous. Well, guess what? They're going to be sitting on that committee that's going to be making a decision about you. And you want your email in their head when they sit down to make that decision. You want to tell them why you wish to attend their university, why you wish to study with them, and if they have any advice for you as you seek admission. And in this email, I would clearly state which of their publications, which you hopefully will have read, that makes it so compelling for you to study with them. Because at a graduate level, at a bachelor's level, there's thousands of students, okay? But at a graduate level, it's almost like a tutorial, right? The programs are smaller, the professors know your name. Again, they're investing in you as someone who's gonna do well and achieve many, many great things in the future. So you want to convince those professors in that program of great esteem that you, in fact, are worthy of that kind of investment. Now, there's a fine line. You don't want to stalk someone, right, and harass them. But on the other hand, you definitely want to let them know that you are there and you are interested in them. And then finally, in some cases, simply making these key professors aware of your interest, it can be very helpful in terms of your admission and scholarship and a graduate program. So again, thank you for your attention. My name is Dr. Nate Myers. I'm Associate Provost and I'm Professor at Youngstown State University. And very briefly, Youngstown State is a university of 12,000 students located in Ohio, which at the moment is the land of the rising sun. And thank you for your attention, and hopefully we can answer some questions for you later.
Thank you, Heather, Emily, and Dr. Nate for great presentation. So we will move to Q&A sessions. We already have some questions in the Q&A, and you have already answered most of the questions already. But if you have any questions, please type them into the question box you probably see at the bottom. So there's one question. I'm an undergrad planning to apply to a graduate program. When I apply for graduate school, should I make up my mind whether I want to take a PhD or just a master's? Or will it be okay even if I am still undecided? Can some of you answer to these questions?
I can give you my personal experience. So when I walked this road, just like you're getting ready to walk it, I decided that I wanted to pursue a master's degree in history, which I started. And I never thought anything past that because I always wanted to study history. And at some point in my master's program, I decided that I was actually interested in something else for my career. So it allowed me the flexibility to change. There are two different kind of programs which you're getting at. There are those combined master's PhD programs, and then there's a separate master's PhD program. Here's what I think. I think being 22, if I had to, I know a lot more now than I did when I was 22. I know a lot more about myself now than I did when I was 22. If you are absolutely confident that what you want to do is what you want to do, then go to the master's PhD program combined. If you think there's any chance that you will change your mind somewhere between 22 and 25, and it happens a lot, it's better to do the separate master's and PhD because that will give you more flexibility for your career.
Heather and Emily, do you want to add something?
I would just add exactly what Nate said, but it's always a great opportunity. Questions like these too is to talk with the program directly. It lets them know who you are. It lets them know your goals, what you're interested in, and you may even be able to talk with a faculty member and really, start that conversation. Talk to them. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to do, and they can be a guide as well. Your admissions counselor. So it's always but it is a good way to start that initial conversation with the program, let them know who you are. It can help with the whole application process for you.
I agree with everything that has been said. I mean, before you start your application, I think it's best that you decide, like Dr. Myers said, what type of applicant you're going to be. So are you going to be a PhD applicant, or are you going to be somebody who gets the master's on the way? So doing that research that Emily mentioned beforehand will be very beneficial before starting your application.
So for getting financial aid wise, is it okay for them to change their minds after they got into say master's degree program, then they want to change to PhD? Can they still after they got in, after they study the program, can they change to PhD programs and get the for example, fellowship?
I personally say it depends on the program. Usually, if you're starting with a master's and you decide you want to continue for the PhD, there will be some form of reapplication that you'll need to fill out in order to be considered for the PhD program. And it all depends on if that particular school offers a PhD in the field that you're interested in too.
Thank you. So the next question. So I think this person, he or she got TOEFL IBT score 101, and So should I not, but she or he hasn't taken the GRE, I guess. So the question is, should I not apply for graduate school, which requires GRE? And she or he, I don't know. I'm a third-year student.
Congratulations on the strong TOEFL score. That's excellent. You must have had a very good educational background and a lot of hard work went into that. So I think that's right on the borderline. I think with a 101, you can definitely you start to prepare for a GRE. If your math skills are strong, which they probably are, then you probably just want to focus on that verbal component, the preparation for the verbal part of the GRE, because there's a lot of tricks, strategies, and memorization that will go into a high GRE score. On the other hand, as I mentioned, there are many programs that don't require it. So I think it's up to you.
I just wanted to add really quickly to that too. I know with the pandemic and the impact of it too, I feel like a lot of US institutions where programs typically required it are not, and some have adjusted that on their website or noted, others may not have. So if you're also seeing that as a requirement, I think it's completely appropriate to reach out and ask if it's still being required, at least for the 2021 application cycle.
Thank you. So next question. Master's and doctoral programs are separate in Japan. If I am thinking about getting PhD in the States, would 2 years of a master's in Japan helpful in application for PhD in US graduate schools, or would that be a waste of time?
I think it depends on what field that's in. Like if it's like a yeah, it depends on the type of program it is, and whether like your background is in that particular field or not. Some students, like say they're transitioning from like English to like IT, it's probably good that you get some of the IT skills before you apply to a PhD program if it's like if they're completely different. And then also, depending on the type of master's program as well, some master's programs, at least in the US, they have different requirements for graduating. So if you're looking at a PhD program and your master's required a thesis, for example, that would look really good that you've done that research before and you've written that paper and done the presentation on your PhD application. But then if the program is, a project-based one, or not project-based, but like if it's like comprehensive exams or something like that, it could go either way for your PhD. So it just kind of depends. I hope that makes sense.
I would also add too that, so one of our professors here is a professor of mechanical engineering. He got his bachelor's from a university in Romania. He went on to a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Meiji University in Tokyo. And then he came to the US for a PhD. So, but all three of those were, as Heather was saying, they were constant with each other. It was engineering, engineering, engineering. And it was all three very good universities and well-known programs. So it made sense.
So that it's similar to what we were just talking, but I'm planning to apply for a second master's degree in a different field. Do you think it's necessary to write why I would like to hold another master's degree in statement of purpose?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. I think so. It's something you want to kind of explain, and actually it can really boost your application of the way that you can write that and explain how you got this new interest or what experience led to that. That can kind of make your application even stand out if you take time and prepare that statement of purpose. And then I have some experience working on like the immigration side of things, so I would just say it's also good to have that. So when you're going for your visa appointment, you're clearly explaining that. That can be a help as well.
Okay, next question is, how long can be resume or CV? 1 page?
I think it depends. I think it completely depends on you. If you have many years of experience, you're going to have a longer one. If you don't, you're going to have a shorter one. And everyone realizes that, and that's okay. There's no shame in having a shorter CRV. It's just who you are. And the important thing is to list what you've done and list the important things you've done, whether it's long or short.
So while we wait to come up with the new other questions, we received some questions in advance. So let me share the questions and another question. Okay, so if online classes continue in the future, is it likely that international student admissions will decrease? But you'd like to know what changes are caused by the pandemic in the application process.
Well, the second part of that question, I think Emily kind of touched on it a little bit. A lot of universities have adjusted their admissions application and admissions application process due to the pandemic. So they're a little bit more flexible with test scores or official documents and things like that. So there's been a lot of changes, I think, throughout the country. To answer the other question about international student admissions decrease, there has been a decrease just because it's harder for students and people to travel right now. So students are not able to get here physically on campus. But yeah, so there's definitely been a decrease for this year specifically.
Thank you. So like related to the previous questions, previously, I mean, from the pre-registration, we got questions about, let me see, where did, so there was a rumor that the number of applications from China has decreased over the years. Is that true? Does it mean that other international applicants have a more chance getting in?
I can take this initially if anyone wants to add. Of course, I think we've seen this year, because of the pandemic, a decrease just across the board with international students. Like Heather mentioned, the difficulty in travel right now and in getting visas, things like that. I don't know that we've seen a decline with students from China in particular, though, outside of that. And I think it's very dependent on the institution. So some institutions that may be where they have a majority of their international students coming from. For other institutions, it may be from different parts of the world. And then other colleges may have a more diverse group of international students coming. So I think that's very dependent on the institution to which you're applying. And most institutions, if they don't have that posted, that's information they would share. That's something that is tracked. So I think they would readily share that as well if you had that question.
Thank you. So let me go to the next question. Do you think it is meaningless that entering another field's PhD or master course in the US after getting PhD in Japan? So I guess this person is already getting PhD in Japan, but with the another field of study, is she or he can take PhD or master course in another subject?
I could take this. I don't know anyone who's done a PhD that would want to do two. But if you're that person that wants to do two, I think you got to very clearly explain, as I think Emily was saying earlier, or Heather was saying, one of them, I think Heather, why are you, what accounts for the change? And why have you decided, probably at this point you may be 30 or older. At this point in your life, what's caused you to change, and you want to invest another 4 or 5 years, in a different area of study? I mean, that would be a big question, I think, to a admissions committee.
Thank you. So next question. Let's see. I gained Japanese scholarships and had some connections. So, okay, let's see. So I can introduce excellent Japanese students to American University. Could I write about it in my statement of purpose? So I guess this person got the scholarship in Japan, and can she or he write about it in his or her statement of purpose?
I honestly think it depends on what program you're looking for. As you mentioned in some of the previous presentations, the statement of purpose kind of highlights your experiences, generally speaking, highlights your experiences and how you came to decide that you want that master's or PhD program. If, let's say, an example would be if you're interested in like a business degree and that experience has led you to want to start your own business doing that would make sense to me to add into your statement of purpose. But if you're looking at something that's like public health or something like that, I don't think it would make sense to include that in your statement of purpose. So it just depends on what program you're applying to.
Thank you. So next question. By any chance, does your school provide family support? So we had a similar question from the pre-registration also. So if the applicant already have a family, can they bring the family with them? And can they get like support from the university, including the child care?
I can take this question. So you are permitted, if you're an international student coming on that F1 status or J1, typically it's F1, you can bring a spouse and children. It's just that you're going to need to show financial support for them. So typically, I think for most institutions, but if you guys know something else, please chime in. I think for most institutions, when they are considering you for funding for their program, it is just for the student. So it might be like a monthly stipend, and then they may cover tuition or part of tuition or something like that. So if that's happening, usually the student, if they're bringing a spouse, if they're bringing children with them, they will have to account for the extra living expenses. In order for institutions to issue this document, the F1, or I'm sorry, the I-20 that you need and your family would need, you have to show proof of support and funding, not just for you, but for them for at least a year. We're required by law to have that in order to issue that document. So that may be something you want to talk to the program about if they have any additional scholarship or money, or that graduate school does. If you're a strong candidate, it may be that they have extra monies that they can add to that or something like that. And then as far as childcare, that would depend on the institution as well. I think a lot of colleges and universities, both smaller and large, do offer like a daycare on campus. There's usually a lot of faculty, staff that take their children. So it's very possible that if you and your significant other are in class, your child can be right there on campus as well, and you can easily check in on them.
Yeah, I would just echo that, that Youngstown State, we have a daycare on campus, and that it's very common, as Emily said, for staff and professors to make use of that. And of course, we introduce our students with families to that. I will say, though, that you probably want to be clear about what your after-tax earnings will be for your assistantship, because in our assistantship offers, it really, you really wouldn't expect to support a family or a dependent from that assistantship offer. It would be very tough for two people even. For one person, you could make it, you know, but it's just not enough there after tax to support a family.
Thank you. And another question, kind of related to the question, the topic that we were just talking about. There was a question about the age. Let's see, where is it? Is age an important factor in getting admitted? Is there an age limit for applying to graduate programs?
No, we've seen, young applicants, right out of undergraduate, like around 22. And then we've seen students who are as old as 60, 70 years old, going back for a master's or a PhD just because of their love of the field. So short answer, no.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Let's see. So I'm currently studying liberal arts in undergraduate, but I do not have expertise. What would be advantage of studying liberal arts from your perspective?
As someone who majored in history and philosophy as a bachelor student, and then again went to graduate school in history, which is a liberal art, I think that obviously, I think you asked me, all the great questions we face as humans are asked and answered in the liberal arts about our existence. However, that doesn't pay the bills. So you need to be very focused if you're going to go on, and if you're going to go on for a graduate career in the liberal arts, how you're going to monetize that, how you're going to make money and have a career out of, asking and answering those great human questions.
I just wanted to add, I think that there's definitely benefits in a liberal arts degree, just because, you know, you've touched on a lot of different things, you know, with all the different classes you had to take probably to complete that. I think for graduate school, you may need to find a focus. So, you know, which of those classes do you think you want to dive deeper in, and how do you monetize those skills as well? So speaking with representatives of the program can kind of help see if some of their mission or some of their objectives align with your goals, and that can give you a sense on if it's a good fit for you or that program's a good fit.
Thank you. So let's go to the next question. Which is better, writing only good things or including excuses? I think within the statement of a purpose, this person had, I think, very bad time at undergraduate programs, and so should he or she should include the bad experience. And also, I think it's the next question is like somehow related to this, but if the student has a low GPA, what can they do?
I can start with, so I think it's important to frame things right and how you speak to them. So speak to relevant experience. Sometimes that's not always everything that worked out well, but maybe there was something that you had to overcome. There's something you had to work through. I think a lot of graduate programs, one of the things I've seen faculty review committees look for is grit, what they call grit, to see maybe a situation you encountered that you overcame. And it can show that as a graduate student, you know, your abilities and skills, because graduate school, it's not an easy feat. It's something to work at and achieve. So it could turn out to be a plus in a way. You may not want to go into multiple explanations or something like this. You probably want to frame it so that this was the experience, this is what I learned, and now this is what I take with me forward. This is how it's going to benefit my study in your program. And then one thing I just wanted to add as well, if you have a low GPA, maybe even below the minimum requirement, do not let that keep you from applying. Before you apply and pay an application fee that may not be refundable, it is a good idea to reach out to the admissions office, even to the program directly, and just be kind of forthcoming. My undergraduate is low, or it's under the minimum. Would I still be considered? There are definitely programs that would still be able to make that exception. And we have seen students go on to get their master's, PhD, and maybe it was not so great initially in their bachelor's. Other programs, because they're competitive, they may be very strict about it. So you may not want, again, to pay that application fee only to have, you know, a hard no right away. So just something to think about as well.
I'll just add that that our applicants who have been admitted with a low GPA, usually what the program looks at is some sort of like compensation. So if they have a low GPA, they're going to want to see, the program will say, yeah, but their GRE score was incredible. So obviously, you know, there's some academic ability there. Or, you know, maybe they had a low GPA, but they graduated 6 years ago from the university. In the past 6 years, their professional experiences have clearly proven that the GPA wasn't an accurate, you know, capture of their potential. And so, you know, I think that there's, again, framing, there's ways that you can talk about what you've learned and how that grit factor that you've overcome despite of everything, you know, despite things.
Thank you. So this will be probably the last questions. What is a usual day like at graduate school? Is it similar to life at university?
I can speak from my experience in graduate school. In my opinion, it's a little bit more hands-off. You're kind of there, well, at least in my master's program, it's kind of like you go to class and, you know, you have your peers there, but it's kind of like, all right, you know what you need to do, so get it done. And then I'm currently in an EDD program right now. So it's a little bit different from master's to like a doctorate, because a doctorate, you kind of work with the faculty a little bit more. So you have that interaction. And then if I'm frank, you know, my bachelor's, it was a commuter school. So commuter meeting, like you went to class, you didn't do any extracurriculars or join any clubs. You just went to class and you left. So that was my experience. So the typical day is usually whenever your classes are. I took night classes, so I would work during the day and then I would go to class at night, and then in between on the weekends I would do my homework. So depending on the program, when they're having classes and the type of program will kind of determine what your day is going to look like. And that was my experience.
Thank you. So let me finish the Q&A session now.